Hey everybody, welcome back once again to another episode of The Art of Photography. My name is Ted Forbes, and today we're going to revisit an oldie but goodie, a German camera classic. This is the Pentacon Six, and I want to break this down and talk about it today. The Pentacon Six is it's a medium format camera, and it's completely manual. Manual focus, manual exposure, manual shutter, manual aperture, manual everything. And I bought mine years ago when I didn't have a lot of money at the time, and I really wanted to get into shooting medium format, and I wanted to get a Hasselblad. I wanted to be able to get a certain sharpness to my photos and a certain contrast and things that I couldn't get without going with a nicer route. And the Pentacon Six, they're not made anymore, and it's actually kind of a nice, inexpensive alternative to a Hasselblad system. There are others out there, and I'm not saying this is the only way to go, but that's the reason I got into this, and the main reason is because it's a modular system camera. So in other words, there are multiple lenses that are designed for this. There are multiple accessories. There's things like bellows. There's extensions for macro focusing on the lens. And for just a couple $100 entry level, you can get into a pretty decent camera, and as you have money over time, can get into the system. And so that's why I actually got into this originally. It's still a camera I like to shoot on. And the reason I want to start talking a little more about film, one, I've had a lot of people who have asked me to if I could come back around to film and some tutorials, some how-tos, things like that. We are actually doing 3 shows a week right now, if you haven't heard that yet. And so the easiest thing to do is I'm just gonna remind you to subscribe. I'll put the button up there. Subscribe so you can always be aware of the latest and greatest shows as they come, because we're putting out a lot of material now. So real quick, this show is staying the same. We release this every Sunday. This is the proper Art of Photography episode. And then I have 2 little shows that are a lot shorter format that we're doing. Then they're going to come out basically every Wednesday and Friday. And those shows are going to be on Wednesdays. We have Photo Threes, which is basically 3 things that I pick every week that are important or interesting or entertaining about photography, and we talk about that. And then on Fridays, we have the Photo Friday Q&A, and whatever that's going to be named eventually. I'm not real crazy about that name. But anyway, it'll be a conversation. So each week I will answer a question that was asked in the comments on the previous week. And so we'll have a little bit of a dialogue going there. So that's a great place if you want to catch up and you have questions about things maybe I didn't cover in the show that you want to know or that you're interested in or have a comment to say. And we can kind of revisit some of those and talk to them week to week. So anyway, today I want to talk about the Pentacon Six, which is by no means a small camera, as you can see. But I want to get a little up close. So what we're going to do is reconfigure here and take a look at the Pentacon Six. Okay, so we're going to do some up and close here with the Pentacon 6 TL. TL stands for through the lens, which I'm going to show you how the viewfinder works in a second. A couple things, like I mentioned, about this camera that I think are really important, and the reason I really got into it is based on a modular system. So what this means is there are a lot of accessories that are built for this that you can find. The downside is these are sort of pseudo collector's items. So sometimes the cameras aren't too bad, but sometimes the accessories, you find somebody who's got it and they want way too much for it. But you can find stuff, it just takes a little looking, that's all. But basically, some of the accessories I've got for it, I've got one of the cable releases, but I prefer a modern one, which you can use. I'll show you in a second. Also, there are bellows extensions, which if you want to do macro photography is very handy. And there are also some extension tubes you can get for the lens. So basically, if you unmount the lens, you can put extension tubes in there, and what that does is it pushes the lens further out, which enables the possible methods of doing macro photography if you can't focus close enough on something. That's the workaround. You do have to modify the exposure a little bit, and we'll cover that in a future episode. But anyway, the main thing too, I think that's also important to note here is the lenses are wonderful for this. I've got 3 of them. This is the Flektogon Carl Zeiss 50mm that's on here right now, which is a decent, it's not super wide, but it is wide because we're on medium format. So the 50mm, this stops all the way down to 22. The widest is f4, and it's a beautiful lens. I really like this. There's a lot of sharpness that you can get out of this, and it just is outstanding. So that's one thing worth noting on here. The other lenses I've got are the standard 80mm lens, which is an f2.8, and it's beautiful. And then I've also got the 180mm lens, so it's kind of nice to have. I don't use it as much because it is massive, but if you're doing portraits or something where you need to get the telephoto aspect in there, it certainly works really well for that. There are longer lenses you can get and wider lenses as well. And I'll link to some resources in the show notes on this, so if you're interested, you can see. The other thing that's interesting is the lens mount. Basically, there's a ring here, the collar, you turn that. Sorry, I'm not holding this correctly. I can't really get it. There we go. And that releases the lens. And basically that is what the lens mount looks like. What's cool about this is there are some other camera systems that share this same lens mount. And basically they are, like there's the Ukrainian, the Kiev 88 CM. It has to be the CM version. They actually match the lens mount. So you could use your Pentacon lenses on the Kiev 88 or vice versa. Also there is the Kiev 6C, which looks a lot like this, although usually they're all black, but very similar camera. They do, I think, come standard with, you know, a really bad meter, so you can actually do through the lens metering. And then also there's a later version of this called the Exacta 66, and there's a couple other cameras, but basically it's nice because you can do that. I've also seen lens adapters if you want to use these lenses on your digital cameras. I've seen these, you can find them on eBay and things like that for like Canon, Nikon standard fare, and it allows you to use this. Now remember, you're not shooting medium format generally with digital cameras, at least the ones that most of us have, and you know, so they're going to be slightly different. But anyway, that is one thing that makes it nice. I'm going to leave that open for a second so I can show some other things on here. Oh, actually, let's put it back on because I want to show you how the picture taking works on here. So we'll mount that lens back on. Okay, on the top, this is a very strange design, but it's kind of cool at the same time, and they kind of merge the look of an SLR camera with the actual functionality of something more like a twin lens reflex in the way this works. And so what you're going to do is you slide this little button over and it opens up the viewfinder. So you're going to look down into the camera to shoot. What's interesting about this, right now you're not seeing anything because the shutter is not cocked, so therefore the mirror is up against the body. But anyway, if I go ahead and cock the shutter here, you can see the mirror come down, and now you can see the window that's in front of us, and I use this for focusing. If you want to fine-tune your focus a little bit, there is a little magnifying glass in here I can pull down, and that allows you to really fine-tune your focusing and get it right. This is not a real fast camera to use, obviously. Another thing they've got in here is one of these, a lot of the old TLRs have this too, the sports viewfinder. So if I push that outer part up, that allows you to sort of, well, now the mirrors or the magnifier's in the way, but anyway, this allows you to kind of shoot through and at least manually see where your framing is going to be. So if you're shooting sports or something at the time, I certainly wouldn't recommend this camera for that today. But anyway, a couple other things on the top of the camera. You do have the shutter speed dial over here, so you set your shutter speed and you have kind of limited options on that. There's a bulb exposure, so if you want to do, I think 1 second is the slowest timed it'll do, and then bulb leaves it open, so if you're doing a really long night exposure or something like that. When you're ready to shoot, the button's over here, you press fire, and we've just taken a picture if we had film in here. And it has a locking shutter release, which is kind of nice. And also, I don't know if you can pick this up on the video or not, it is threaded for a cable release. And a lot of times I've done night photography where I'll use a tripod and I have a separate cable release for this. And so that makes it nice. You put it over into the bulb exposure mode, and then it allows you to, you know, press the button down on your cable, and then that has a little lock on it, so I can do really long exposures for night photography, which is kind of nice. A couple other features that this camera does have. This little dial really does nothing as far as impacting the image, but it's just a little ISO reminder. So if I put 400 speed film in there, twist that over to 400 so you remember what's in here, which is kind of nice. And then also on the bottom of the camera, there is a self-timer release over here, so if you're doing a selfie on film, you could certainly use that. And then on the bottom we have our tripod mount, and then we also have a flash sync, so you can put a cable in there and actually drive flashes from the camera as well, and it works just fine. Can't remember what the sync speed is on here. I believe I'd have to go look it up. Well, there's the flash sync, so it's somewhere between 15 and 30. It's probably 30, so it's pretty slow. So it's a little bit limiting in terms of that, but you could indeed use a flash with it. And you kind of have to consider too, when this camera was made, when it was designed, and this was way before the modern digital cameras that we have today that really do lots of things for you and make life easier. But I've always really liked these, particularly for not so much street photography, but for off the cut, or for more setup studio types of things, portrait work, because I have complete control over everything. There's no menus to scroll through, there's no LEDs to read. It's simply, you know, you understand exposure, you set it, and it shoots the picture. And I've had really wonderful results with this camera. And you know, I think at the time, I mentioned that I bought this because at the time I couldn't afford a Hasselblad system, and even today, the Hasselblad is still, you get into a lot of money when you're buying accessories and stuff. And so this gave me a modular system that I just kind of thought was funky and interesting. You know, of course there's Bronica and some other things too, but this certainly is a system worth considering if you're interested in something like that. One last thing I want to do is I'm going to load some film in here, and I want to show you how this works because it is a little confusing, and if you don't have a camera manual for this, you might not understand. You might get frame overlap, and I've never had a problem with frame overlap unless I had another body that just got old at one point and it did have trouble. But anyway, I've got some Kodak Tri-X here, so we'll just, I will show you how this is loaded. And if you've never loaded a medium format camera before, it can feel a little janky. I'm going to take the lens off so I can set this down, and you can kind of get a idea of how this goes. So to basically access the back here to put the film in, there's a little lock release here, and this comes open, and the back slides open. Sorry, I can't do it with one hand. And you can see the shutter curtain, which is actually pretty massive. And this is the same design that's used in all the old 35mm cameras that has a shutter curtain, so you don't want to press down or touch that or anything, obviously. When you're done with a roll of film, you're going to, put your spool over on this side, and then these little knobs pull up if you need to move it over. And what we're going to do is load this one. So what I like to do when I load film is I'll take the medium format cartridge here, and I will go ahead and just put this in, and I don't take the tape off. And yet. So we're going to go ahead and put that in. We'll mount it up under the ring there. Okay, so now it spins, and it will spin freely. Now what I'll do is I'll just use my nail, or you can get a screwdriver or something. I'll just go ahead and cut that tape, and then I'll bring it up here. Now what you don't want to do is have this completely unravel, because you will expose your film to light, and you don't want to expose it to light unless you're making a picture and the camera is doing that. So I kind of leave one thumb on the left-hand side, and I'll bring this over to the right. And just make sure it stays tight. It's usually not a big problem. And you'll see there's a little slot on the plastic spool here, and I will go ahead and put that in there. Now here's the key to loading the Pentacon 6. There's a little white dot down here. I don't know if you can see that or not. What we're going to get is we're going to get a lineup here on the back of the film, and most film will have this. And we bring it all the way around like such, and then that allows us to, I don't know if you can see this, I twisted the winder all the way up, and I'm not letting it come all the way back. I'm just inching it forward. See, there's our arrows. I want to line those arrows up, and I'm not releasing the shutter here till they come here. Then go ahead and bring it all the way back around. Now I can safely close the back, and the film has not been exposed. We'll go ahead and twist the lock there. And now what I'll do is you can release the button, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to watch this counter here until the number 1 comes up. There's one more. And there's one more thing I forgot to show you on here too. We'll go ahead and do. Okay, so now we're at 0. The next one will be 1, and now the film is properly loaded and ready to go. One thing I forgot to mention too that's kind of hidden over here on the side is you can do multiple exposures with this camera. There's a little release here. So what you would do is take your picture for the first exposure, pull that release over and wind it. And what that does is that allows the mirror and the camera to reset itself without advancing the film, and it allows you to do multiple exposures, which is kind of cool too. So for all intents and purposes, that is the Pentacon 6 and how to get film loaded in it. Okay, so that is everything you ever wanted to know about the Pentacon 6, and I have a real soft spot in my heart for this camera. This is actually the second one I've had. I've had 2 Pentacon 6s, and I've owned a bunch of lenses and things like that. And, I think for me, the reason is that this came, I found out about this camera in a time where I really wanted to get a Hasselblad because I wanted a higher degree of detail and contrast and just better picture quality in general in the medium format stuff I was shooting. It did a lot of Holga work and a lot of toy camera work, and that was fine, but I wanted to do some more serious work as well on something that was a little bit better built with better lenses. The Pentacon 6 was a very cheap alternative, and they obviously have an entire system of lenses and accessories that you can get for these things. And so I can already see it now. People are going to put in the comments, well, hey, how about Bronica's and how about this or whatever. And there are many systems that you can go with. I just particularly like this one, and we'll talk about other things in the future episodes as well. But you can find these on eBay relatively cheaply. It's been a while since I've looked, but you want to stay for around $200. You can get a body that's in decent working order, that's probably even been overhauled a little bit and cleaned up, and an 80mm lens, which is the standard lens you want for medium format. It's the equivalent of like a 50mm lens for 35mm or full frame digital. And for basically $200 or so, you can get into a system, and then you can buy the accessories and the other lenses and stuff as you have the money and can afford to do so. Obviously, the downsides are especially when you get into the telephoto lenses, they are massively huge, and it's not a real stealth system to shoot on. But if you are interested in doing studio work or portrait work or something like that, there's some outstanding optics that come with these things, and I think it's really a decent system for the money. The age of these is to a point now where you will have to have them probably serviced once in a while. The Pentacon 6 is really notorious for having basically tracking issues with the framing, and so what'll happen is basically the gears get out of joint after a while as they get old, and you'll advance the film and you basically start seeing frame overlap on the film. So if that happens, I mean, you know, you have to consider too the money you're spending on something like this. This happens with older cameras, and you know, you're going to have to budget in probably a CLA every now and then. If you're not familiar with what a CLA is, it basically means clean, lubricate, and adjust, and any camera repairman can do this. Unfortunately, with old manual cameras, the camera repairmen are becoming fewer and far between, but there are some people who do these mail order, and I'll provide some resources on the website for that as well if you're interested. So anyway, that is the Pentacon 6. As we are progressing into future episodes, I want to talk about film a little more, and just to give you a little preview of what's to come. One thing that's really interesting is the local lab. I've had a lab here in Dallas that I've used for years that I love. They've done great work, and they actually announced a couple of months ago that they no longer do E6, which is slide film. So I'm going to have to find a new way to send that out somewhere to be processed, probably Dwayne's or something like that. And this is kind of a travesty because what we're starting to see is film is starting to drift into the alternative process category. And so I want to come back to that because I've done a lot of episodes on film in the past, DIY, how to develop at home, things like that. And the one thing that's interesting is, you know, most of the videos that I did on those were a couple of years ago, and it is starting to change. So how would I address those same things in the current day? So in the coming weeks, we're going to start looking at some of those things. So you guys who like to shoot film are in for a treat on that. So anyway, guys, once again, this has been The Art of Photography. Make sure you watch our other shows coming up during the week. We have shows every Wednesday, Friday, and then this show on Sunday. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Until next time, later.